I think the back squat is the most important foundational movement that we have. It's one that we should work to perform on a consistent basis. And as we grow older, it is one that we should continue to work to continue to be able to perform. In the context of health and longevity, we oftentimes just refer to a simple body weight squat. Like the simple act of being able to perform a full depth body weight squat is a fantastic assessment for all types of mobility restrictions, imbalances, and coordination, both in people in general and, in the case of sometimes younger athletes, athletic potential. Now, in the sphere of strength and conditioning, we often refer to a loaded barbell squat, and that's what we'll be talking about this video, because I think it is the one movement that every single athlete out there should work to perform in a proficient manner. Now, anatomy does play a part when we talk about this particular lift, but regardless of any sort of mobility restrictions you may have, just because of the anatomy of your hips, ankles, and knees, you should still be able to perform a good looking squat with a decent amount of weight. Let's talk about another set of movements that oftentimes can get taunted as being equally as important or perhaps better than the back squat itself. Let's look at compound movements in general. Let's start with the deadlift. Now, when it comes to like motor unit recruitment, you can maybe consider the deadlift and back squat to be in equal grounds. There's a difference between anterior and posterior chains, but let's look past that. So when it comes to like the maximal amount of force that we're able to generate within the lift, I think the back squat could even come in second to the deadlift. But what truly makes a back squat different is the fact that it's just harder to cheat at. Like if you have any sort of mobility restrictions or muscle imbalances, it will expose them. You know, if that bar gets out of position, if you get out of balance, it is much harder to save or grind out a squat than it is a deadlift. Oftentimes coaches will even scrap deadlifts out of the programs because they don't think the risk to reward ratio is there. Because it is easier to just hold on to the bar and keep pushing on a deadlift than it is in a squat. You've seen people getting injured like this. Maybe you've gotten injured yourself. As I talk about this, please do not think that I don't consider the deadlift to be a very technique demanding lift. When performed at the highest level, there is an incredible amount of technique that goes down into having a proper deadlift. It is simply my experience that for the most part, for most athletes who are not strength athletes in particular, going through and learning how to execute a proper back squat has a better carryover into other areas of sports than a deadlift. That is it. Now, when we talk about technical proficiency, you might bring up something like a power clean or any sort of variation from the Olympic lifts, because those do require a great deal of technique. And this brings me into the next topic, which is the ratio of the amount of weight that we can move within that particular movement and how it compares to the maximal amount of weight that we're capable of. In other words, when we're talking about an Olympic weightlifting variation or an Olympic movement, like a clean, a snatch, or a power clean, a power snatch, you know, even for the most proficient weightlifters out there, their max power clean will only be like 60 to 70% of their best deadlift. You know, if you go all the way down and take it into a full clean, you might go up to like 80%, 85%. You know, and for most people, their deadlift will run pretty close to their back squat. Like I, for one, have spent years without deadlifting, just doing back squats. And for shits and giggles, every time I max out my back squat, I also max my deadlift. And my striking numbers always keep up. It's another awesome thing about the back squat that it has a great carryover into another lifts. And if you ask people around in the spheres of strength and conditioning, they'll tell you the same. It is a common occurrence. So this means that even if we're the best lifters that we can be, even if our technique is as precise as it can be, we're still not gonna be going over that threshold of 85 to 90%, which is required to truly work in strength. There's a reason why all the weightlifters in the world still squat, and they squat quite a bit, and they do a lot of pulls. You know, strength work is just different than the lifts. If you look at a force velocity curve, you'll see the max strength work sits at the top, which means that we oftentimes sacrifice a little bit of velocity to truly express those max efforts. And the Olympic lifts sit somewhat in the top, and that's why they're great for developing power and rate of force development. And that brings me into my last topic. Oftentimes we see people complaining about the work or strength work, like something like the back squat, not being specific enough. And people are worried that they're gonna become slower. So if you're a younger athlete, please do not think like this. Do not believe this. Like, strength work is the foundation to everything we do. And if you get strong properly, you will not get slow. Speed and agility are subproducts of strength work. So we have to do our best to get strong when we have the time to get strong, oftentimes the off season. And as the season comes in closer, we can use sprint training. We must use sprint training and plyometrics in order to like retrain ourselves and use all this new gained strength to get faster. That is the order of operations. So you can compare these movements. Strength work is the foundation to everything. Like, you can't expect to continue to get faster by just sprinting. You know, even though you might have similar amounts of muscle recruitment because it is a max effort at max intensity, like, you need the capacity to overload those muscle fibers. And that can only happen with something like a back squat or a deadlift if you program it back adequately. Like, I'm not a big fan of like scratching things out of programs like some coaches do. Like, if you still perform it adequately and with good technique, you'll see results from any of these lifts. I just think that the back squat is superior for the reasons that I mentioned in this video. It is just the carryover into other parts of athletics is much greater in my opinion. I've seen it, I've tested it myself. So now let's go over some of the technique needed in order to perform a proper back squat. Now for this video, I'm gonna be talking about the high bar setup, which I think is a setup that most athletes should focus on. The reason being is that it is a more of an anterior focus movement. You know, as an athlete, oftentimes you're already putting a lot of emphasis and putting a lot of work in your posterior chain. And there's other and better ways of training that part of your body. You know, and with the low bar setup, we usually tend to lean further forward, and that puts more tension in our lower back, which is an area that we oftentimes have to like look after. You know, if you're a power lifter and this is the setup that fits you the best, then please continue to do so. I'm not a power lifter coach and I'm not a power lifter, so I can't talk very much on that area. If you're a weightlifter, there is no question about it. Continue to do high bar back squats. So let's get started. I normally recommend a narrower grip on the bar, as it can help us engage our upper back more. We want to slightly scoop and engage our scapulas. Note that this does not mean shrugging. We do not want to shrug. We want to engage. Sometimes even pulling down on the bar can also help. Next, the bar should not rest on the very top of your shoulders. This is a mistake that I made when I started. It is a high bar squat, just not as high as we sometimes think. And for those long leg lifters out there, it might be beneficial to go even slightly further back. Just don't turn it into a low bar setup for the reasons I already mentioned. Now you do want to be braced every single time you get the bar off the rack. It is helpful to set it up as high as possible, like I did here. You take a couple steps back and you want to start practicing that routine every single time you lift. You do not want to be thinking about your steps on big sets. Now your toes should be slightly pointed out. This can vary for some people, but for most of us, we will need a slight opening of the feet. For stances, we want to be on the narrower side for a proper high bar squat. But again, there can be some variance here. Once we are set, we take a big breath into our stomachs and push outwardly as we tense our core muscles as hard as we can, pushing inwardly. These contrasting forces will create the intra-abdominal pressure we will use to keep our torso in position and our spine safe. This is the most important part of the lift. People often underestimate how hard they need to brace. Don't make yourself faint, but you need your core to be full of air and hard. It is possible to experience some exertion headaches from this. Make sure you're hydrated, and if they're really bad, go get yourself checked. The bracing should be a 360-degree feeling. The transverse abdominis wraps around the entire torso, so even your low back should be part of this braced feeling. We want to be like an unopened can of soda, as you see here. Now we will commence the descent. Remember that the neutral position of your spine does have a curve. So refrain from forcing extension or overly arching your back during this stage. This means that your hip should be neutral throughout the lift. If you can't reach this position, then you're having issues with posture and pelvic tilt that may require further assistance. The feet need to stay active in this stage, and a good cue for this is pretending like you're trying to rip a newspaper we're standing on top of. This will help you engage the ankle flexor muscles, which need to be active and will ensure you keep pushing through the whole foot. Now we want our knees and hips moving simultaneously as we go down. Your knees should be aligned with your toes and you should be sitting in between your legs. Avoid letting the knees internally rotate. We want our body to be in between our legs. A proper squat depth is where the knees are maximally flexed and the back is still properly engaged. And this can vary for people. We want to stay braced through the whole movement. Make sure our upper back does not slack and it stays engaged through the whole movement. The bar path should essentially be a straight up and down line over the middle of our foot. So the last thing I want you to do with this video is think that you're doing everything wrong. The back squat is one of those lifts that does require a lot of practice. So don't try to overhaul your entire technique. Identify your weak spots and start working on them one by one. Come into each session with one cue in mind and focus just on that. And once you perfect that, move on to the next thing. You know, sports and athletics oftentimes get discussed as if being this innate talent realm, but that is not the case. This is not just for the gifted. If you work hard and stay consistent at these things, they will come for you. That is just how it works.
It is important to draw wisdom from many different places. If we take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Understanding others, the other elements, and the other nations